I was trying to set things up, but it looks like I'm in the middle of heaven because of my background. I don't know if I can fix that, frankly.
That's okay. I've got like this ugly green glow behind me, so we're good.
No, no, your background actually looks really cool. You have a
Thank
bunch
you.
of anime posters
Oh,
and
and My Little Pony character is an anime,
yeah,
and yeah.
it's gonna
So
show everyone who's watching that you're a very interesting character. Right, so if you could introduce yourself to everyone who's watching.
sure. So I'm Dr. Courtney Plante. I am a full professor of social psychology at Bishop's University in Sherbrooke, Quebec, Canada. So I'm a social psychologist by trade.
And I saw that you have a bunch of fancy degrees, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm not even 100% sure what all those acronyms mean. You're a master of psychology and doctor of psychology, is that right?
Yeah, so all that would just mean Bachelor of Science with the on means honors. So an honors degree in psychology for bachelor's. I have a Master's of Arts in psychology and then a PhD or a doctorate in psychology.
Right. See, everyone, I got a really cool guy for the interview. Right. So going into the first question, when and why did you choose to become a psychologist? And did you have this intention of becoming a professor and researcher from the beginning?
Yes, I never planned to go into psychology initially. I was actually I was in pre-med, so I was planning to go to med school. So most of my background was in biology. And then somewhere around second year, I started like I had to take options, and psychology was like my optional courses just to fill options. And while I was taking psychology, I realized I was actually having more fun and enjoying my psychology courses way more than my biology courses. I was good at biology, but psychology was more fun for me. So I kind of ended up like, well, I could do what I'm good at, or I could do what I enjoy. And I was also pretty good at psychology just because I was liking it. So I was reading it just for fun. So I ended up switching over into that in my second year.
Right. So we both ended up switching our courses. I actually started in computer science, which has absolutely nothing to do with psychology. But I'm glad to see that I'm not alone in my difficulty choosing what I want to do with my life.
It's surprisingly common. As a person who teaches students, I can say a lot of students don't plan to go into psychology, but end up in psychology. So,
So going into the second questions, in your view, what are the main differences between a social psychologist, as I've seen you describe yourself? Although if you prefer another title, please do
oh no,
tell.
I'm a social psychologist. Yeah.
Yep. And a clinical psychologist. What are the main differences?
Right. So a clinical psychologist primarily focuses on like, how do I make people better? How do I take people with mental illness and make them better or help to sort of improve their lives? In social psychology, we're much more focused on trying to, I mean, so I'm a researcher first and foremost. So I don't, my job isn't to necessarily help people. If people get helped with my research, all the better. But I primarily focus on trying to understand and explain human behavior. And as a social psychologist, specifically understand how does our environment and the world around us impact our behavior. So like a cognitive psychologist might focus on how does the way our mind work affect our behavior? A personality psychologist might say, how does our personality affect our behavior? But for me as a social psychologist, it's how does the world around us and the people in it shape the way we think, feel, and behave?
Right, we're ha actually having a lot of not courses, a lot of classes about this very topic. So as far as I can tell, every psychologist, like they have a bit of a social psychologist in their course. I'm not sure if that's true or not.
This yeah the when we teach psychology, we always sort of treat these as like isolated fields. Like, oh, you take cognitive, you take personality, you take social. But when you actually get into the higher levels, you realize they all kind of bleed together. You can't really do social without doing some cognition and some personality. You can't really do clinical without doing some developmental and some personality and some social. So
Mhm.
they bleed together a lot more than we'd care to admit sometimes.
So going into the third question, thinking about your first research project, what was it and how did it go? what expectations did you have going into it that ended up changing?
So I'm gonna make a little bit of fun of cognitive psychology here. When I first got into psychology, I actually wanted to go into cognitive psychology. That was what my honors thesis was on. That was the first piece of research I ever did for myself, and it was on object recognition. So how do we recognize an object? What processes go on? And I spent 2 years coming to the conclusion that things that look the same are hard to tell apart. And it was at that point that I was like, okay, I'm done with cognitive psychology. I got kind of bored with it after 2 years of it. So it worked. The hypothesis that I had was supported by the data. But at the end of the day, I was like, I don't want to spend 2 years studying all this nitty gritty stuff. For people who love cognitive psychology, it's incredibly fascinating. It just wasn't for me. And so when I went to apply to graduate school, I shifted gears. I said, I want to study big picture stuff. I want to know, like, where does fascism come from and how do we stop it? And that's a much more like applied social psychology question. So yeah, my initial project was interesting. I liked it, but when I was done, I sort of had enough, and it sort of compelled me to switch fields out of cognition into social psychology.
Going into question number four, now that you've authored and co-authored many papers over the years, has your approach to doing research changed? What are some of what are some things you wish you knew back when you started?
Yeah, I definitely. So a big part of my approach to research has been to become more collaborative. And I was really bad for this when I first started. I think when I first started, I thought like, okay, research projects are things that I do on my own. I come up with my own hypotheses. I run them myself. I test them myself. I write them myself. And it always seems like a lot more work when you have to do it by yourself. One of the things I was very fortunate to have early on in my career was I stumbled upon, quite by accident, a number of just phenomenal collaborators who I've worked with for like 15 years now. And they've just been amazing. And science is so much fun when you do it with other people. So if I could go back to my early self and give myself a head start, I would say collaborate early, find other people who have the same interests as you. Research is so much more fun and so much easier when you have other people to bounce ideas off. The other thing I think I would tell myself is you don't have to reinvent the world. I think a lot of the mistakes that early psychologists or scientists in general feel is like, oh, I have to come up with a remarkable new idea that will overhaul the entire field. Otherwise, what am I doing? And the reality is, science is like moving the ball down the field 1 yard at a time, right? It's very rare to get some incredible paradigm shifting discovery. Much more often, you're just gradually nudging our knowledge forward. And I think if I understood that, I wouldn't put so much stress on myself to feel like, what's my remarkable idea that's going to change the entire field forever? So that would have been good to know, I think.
When you say that you found some collaborators that you really connected with, were they people at your university where you were studying, or did you like shoot them an email, or did a professor recommend them to you, something like that?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of all of those. One of the collaborators happens to be at my school, but in a different department. I was actually, it was my colleague, Dr. Sharon Roberts. I was a grad student at the time, and I happened to be proctoring an exam for her. So when you write final exams, there's those people who go around and watch to make sure that you're not cheating. I was one of those for her class, and she was a sociologist. And we started talking between exams and discovered like, oh, she's interested in a lot of the same research that I'm interested in. And so she jumped on board one of my next research projects. Some of my other collaborators, Dr. Stephen Rayson, Dr. Kathleen Gervasi, they were at entirely different universities in other countries. But they sort of found out, and I found out about them, they found out about me. We kind of at the same time realized, oh, we're kind of going to the same places to study the same things. Let's work together rather than working in isolation. Let's just team up and study this together, and it'll be a lot easier for all of us. And so that sort of helped us get this little ball rolling and put together this team of scientists who are all kind of interested in the same thing from different fields, different universities, but we all had this sort of shared research interests.
Right, that's great to know because maybe I'll incorporate your experience into my future research that I hope to do anyways.
I would
Would you
say
mind
be
if I?
open. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, you can say what you were going to say.
I was going to say one thing that I would definitely encourage: be open-minded to chance happenings. Sometimes just a weird little coincidence or just a happy little accident will happen, and if you sort of recognize it for what it is and say, "Oh, like this isn't what I had planned, but that's a neat opportunity." Being open-minded to those can surprise you. So I would say keep on the lookout for those kinds of opportunities where you least expect them.
All right. Would you mind if I shoot you another email later this year with some
Absolutely,
crazy ideas?
sure thing. Absolutely.
All right. Going into the next question, what is Furscience and how did this project start and where it is now?
Yeah, so I guess what I was describing there with my finding my collaborators, that ended up becoming Furscience. So part of what I'm interested in studying is fan culture. I mean, it's not very subtle. I'm a huge fan of a lot of different things. So I wanted to understand what makes people fans, what drives them to be fans. And I decided like everyone in the world was studying sports fans. So I wanted to study something just completely off the wall, like an entirely different group of fans. And so I started studying furries. I was interested in studying these people who wear walking, talking animal costumes and are interested in like art featuring walking, talking animals. So that's what I wanted to study. And again, just by accident, I stumbled into a sociologist who had heard about furries and said, I want to study that too. And then I met my colleague Kathleen. She studies human animal interactions. And she's like, well, that's a unique way to interact with humans. I want to understand that as well. And my colleague Stephen, he studies fan cultures as well. So he was on board. So we all sort of had different approaches that led us to this topic, but we're like, we all sort of want to study the same thing and none of us quite knows what we're doing. So let's just all sort of combine forces and figure out as we go along. And so Furscience kind of started then, and since then we've now been doing it for over a decade, and we've been going sort of around the world studying furries. We've studied more than 30,000 furries from more than 70 different countries. We recently wrote a book on the subject. We published papers. And then we have sort of a website where we try to take everything that we've learned and make it accessible to the average person. So if you want to write a news report or a book report about furries, we sort of provide the data to be able to do that. So it's a collaboration that's led to this outlet for where we can put all of this research and make it accessible to folks.
Right. I actually mentioned to my teacher when I told her that I was going to interview you that we are both furries. And so she was like, oh, what is a furry? Not many people in Brazil have actually heard about furries. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I'll with the magic of editing, I'll put a link somewhere here on the screen for everyone who'd like to check out Furscience. It's
Yeah,
some
the
really
book is
cool
free.
stuff.
Yeah,
Really, it's free.
yeah,
It's just the paperback version that's paid, right? That you can buy
yeah.
on Amazon.
Because we believe in sort of making this data available for free, so you can download the online version for free, and the paperback version on Amazon, that you're just paying the print cost. We don't make any money off of it. It's just the cost for them to physically print and ship it to you. So we don't believe in making money off of any of our books.
Right, really neat stuff. And going into question number 6, how did you become a professor? Was it through some kind of public contest or exam, or someone indicated you to Bishop's University or something else?
Yeah, so I always knew that I wanted to teach. One of the things that you often do in grad school while you're learning to be a researcher is you often get to teach as well. So they gave me a class, in my 4th year to teach, and I fell in love with it. I never expected to like teaching. I was always kind of a shy person, but put me in front of a classroom, and I just love it. And so after that point, I'm like, okay, I want to be a professor, but it's really competitive to be a professor. Like there aren't a lot of jobs. And so for a few years, I kind of bounced around. I did what's called a postdoc, which is what you do when you can't get a real job. So you just do more schooling. So I did a postdoc for a couple of years. And then I sort of bounced around from university to university, doing just sort of a small amount of teaching for them, whatever extra courses they needed, while I tried to find a longer term job. And eventually, a friend of mine said, "Oh, there's this tiny little university that like very few people have heard of in Quebec, which is on the other side of Canada from where I was living." They said, "You throw in an application there. They're kind of a small school. I like teaching at a small school. I like getting to know my students. So I said, give it a shot. And so I applied and I got really lucky. They really liked my application. They liked the work that I was doing. And so I got hired, which was very fortunate because, again, a lot of people in the field, they graduate, they can't find a job, and they ultimately end up going into other careers. So working in industry or working with companies and stuff. But I got really lucky that I got to stay in academia, which is somewhat uncommon in students who graduate with a PhD.
Right. So did you have any other colleagues that also wanted to go into teaching that unfortunately weren't able to, or is your experience of being able to actually go into it after a few years a bit more common?
So I would say almost no one gets to go into academia straight out of getting their PhD. At least here in Canada. I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but in Canada, yeah, you almost always have to do a postdoc, and then even then, you have to keep trying for a few years. You have to build up a research portfolio. It's just very competitive. I could say most of the people that I went to grad school with didn't end up staying in academia. They went into other fields. They're very happy, I should point out. They're very happy in their other jobs. It's not like, oh, you're going to be miserable. It just means that you might not end up in academia. Most people don't end up in academia. They end up doing other things. For me, I ended up, it took me about 5 or 6 years after graduating to eventually get a job. So you have to kind of stick with it. And even then, it is definitely not a guarantee. I very much think that I got kind of lucky, combined with being really, really, really determined. But yeah, it's something worth considering when you go into academia and like you're going into grad school and stuff. You have to be sort of open-minded to the fact that you might not end up as a professor. There are other jobs as well that are worth considering as well. It shouldn't be everyone's goal to become a professor. Um, yeah.
All right. And going into the next question, what does the day in the life of a university professor look like? Things like preparing classes, helping students, or meetings, or other things?
Yeah, so I remember when I was in undergrad, I always thought that my professors, all they did was they stood in front of a class and taught all day. I thought that's all they did, and that's like a fraction of what you do. I only sit in front of a class for about 9 hours per week. The rest of the time is spent either preparing lectures. I also record my lectures and give them online as well, so it's for making recordings. It's also research, so you spend a lot of your time analyzing data, writing papers, editing papers, collecting data, going through ethics. So a lot of it is the research side of things. Meeting with students, helping other students, supervising students. So I've got 3 PhD students and 3 honors students. So I'm spending a lot of time with their projects as well. But also a lot of sort of public outreach stuff. So giving public talks. I'm going to California next month to go give a public talk there about some of the research that I do. Also service stuff. So service to the university. So I serve on the ethics board of my university. There's a lot of committee meetings and a lot of like sort of unpaid work that goes into making a university department function. And they never really tell you about that stuff, but like, you got to balance a budget. You got to figure out where everyone's going to park. So it's a lot of different committees and things that you get asked to serve on. So you spend some time doing that as well. So it's a mixed bag. Every day is always something a little bit different, which I kind of like as a job.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're enjoying yourself. I wonder if my teacher is going to relate to a lot of the stuff that you're saying. I'm really not sure how it works here in Brazil, especially at FURB, which is the university I'm going to, but maybe she can share some stories with us.
Mhm.
And going into the next question, what motivates you to stay in this specific area of psychology? Have you considered working in other areas like clinical psychology, criminal psychology, or human resources, or anything else?
Yeah, I think when I was earlier on in my career, like when I was a graduate student, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was definitely a lot more open to, oh, I could maybe do this, I could maybe do this. I could see myself going back into cognition, maybe. I could see myself maybe going in a more media psychology kind of direction. But once I sort of hit on the line of research that I just love doing, like once I figured out like this is like my favorite kind of research to do, I sort of narrowed in on that, and that sort of became the thing that I like to do. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else now. So earlier on, I would say, yeah, I was much more open to trying other things. But as time has gone on, I found a thing that I like and that I'm pretty good at. And so I've sort of, I cling pretty tightly to that. I'm certainly open to trying new things if the right idea came along. But um, yeah, I found a happy little spot for me. I found the thing that I feel like I'm meant to do.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I hope I'm also going into the right area because I struggled for many years trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Again, like I said, I switched from comp sci to psychology, which has nothing to do with each other. But but hey, I feel like I'm going in the right direction.
And the good news is you don't have to know for sure. Like that was one thing that I wish I could go back and tell myself as well. In undergrad, I'm like, okay, I have to decide now what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And then I got to grad school and I had a similar panic. I said, okay, I got to figure out what research I want to do because if I don't pick the right thing, I'm going to be stuck doing that for the rest of my life. And the reality is, once you graduate undergrad, again, I did my honors thesis in cognition and then I switched to social psych. And then when I was in my grad program, I started off studying like subjective aging and I ended up doing media violence research. And then eventually I wound up in fan research. So you're never stuck in any one thing. This is never like, oh, this is the thing you have to do for your rest of your life. You can't change now. You always have the freedom to sort of pick up and change. It might be a bit of work, but you're never like stuck and required to commit to something forever after this point. So knowing that takes a little bit of pressure off of a person, I think.
I'm glad to hear that. Oh, hopefully I'll still have some options going into the future. So going into the next question, while working in the field, whether before or after joining Bishops, did you have any experience that really impacted you or left a long-lasting impression?
Yeah, I think so. When I did that, the first couple of studies in fan research, right? Fan research isn't a really big area in psychology. Like it's social psychology, which itself is kind of an offshoot of the rest of psychology. But even among social psychologists, fan research is really out there. And then even among fan researchers, studying furries is really out there. So I'm like way out on the edge of weird stuff that psychologists can study. And so when I first started out, I was like, am I being serious here? Is this actually a topic that you can study and make a career out of? And I think the first couple of times I went in person to conventions and started studying furries and eventually My Little Pony fans, bronies. It was those first few conventions that was really impactful. And I was like, oh, like there are some really interesting questions here that are just sort of waiting to be studied. And it sort of made me realize like this is an actual thing. Like this isn't just kind of a joke or a silly little fun side project. Like there's a lot to sink yourself into, and you can take something seemingly trivial like recreation and leisure and take it really seriously. And so that was a big deal. Like I came back from those first couple of conventions just like convinced that okay, this is actually worth doing. So I remember, yeah, those first couple of conventions were instrumental in helping me um, to decide to take this topic really seriously.
Right. And going into the final question, do you have any advice for first-year psychology students as a whole, and more specifically for those of us who hope to become academics and researchers?
Yeah, so I touched on some of them already, I guess, but things like you're never stuck, right? You're never completely like you have to decide now when you're stuck with this for the rest of your life. It should be collaborative, right? Try to think of research as something that you do with, find good collaborators, and definitely do something that you like. I think I'm living a much happier life now than I would have been if I had made myself go into medicine. I probably would have had better job prospects and might have gotten paid more if I went and became a medical doctor. But there's that old saying that if you do a job that you love, you never work a day in your life. And I kind of feel that way, where my job is something I love to do, and I wouldn't trade it for anything else. So I think I would say go into something that you just love doing, right? If you find yourself reading psychology in your spare time, if you find yourself just genuinely interested in this topic, that's probably a sign that this might be what you should be doing. And again, you don't have to love every single part of it. There are still some parts of social psychology that bore me to tears. It doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as it's something like you find yourself genuinely really liking, um, go with that. I would say, see where it takes you.
Right. Well, those were all the questions I had for you. And again, you said some really eye-opening stuff and things that gave me hope. As like I said, I also wanted to go into research and research the furry fandom and hopefully become a professor in the near future. Well, late future, since I'll probably have to get a postdoc and all that stuff you
It
mentioned.
takes a little while.
Yeah, but but hey, I'd like to thank you once again for taking time out of your day for a little nobody like me.
Oh,
But I
I'm still a little nobody. I teach at a tiny little university, so don't that's another piece of advice I'll give to undergrads, right? Your professors at the end of the day are just people. Don't be intimidated by them, right? We all started out there as well. It's good for professors to be humble and to realize that we're not big shots.
well, I did see in your rate my professor page that you have a 5 out of 5 in your rating, so everyone does seem to like you. I think you get a bit of bragging rights because of that.
I teach. I'm really lucky. I get to teach really interesting courses. I think if I had to teach statistics, those ratings would not be as high. I get kind of lucky. I'm spoiled.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're enjoying yourself, and I also enjoyed this interview. Thank you once again, Dr. Plante. Or if you'd like, can I call you Nuka?
I'm okay with either one of those. Absolutely.
All right, Professor Nuka. Thank you once again for helping me out, and I hope you have a great day.
No problem. Thank you very much. It's been a great talk.
All right, bye bye.
Bye. Bye.